Hello and welcome to News Across the Globe. My name is Esther Mwachuku. No fewer than 50 people were killed in central Myanmar on Tuesday in an airstrike by the military on an event attended by opponents to its rule, and this is according to its media. Members of a local resistance movement are the cause. Number of casualties may be as much as 100. A spokesman for the ruling military is yet to respond to inquiries over the attack. Myanmar has been in turmoil since a 2021 coup, with attacks by ethnic minority armies and resistance fighters challenging the rule of the military, which has responded with airstrikes and heavy weapons, including in civilian areas. A member of the local People's Defense Force, an anti-junta militia, told Reuters agency that fighter jets had fired on a ceremony held to open their local office. At least 1.2 million people have been displaced by post-coup fighting. Tuesday's incident could be one of the deadliest among a string of airstrikes since a jet attacked a concert in October, killing at least 50 civilians, local singers and members of an armed ethnic minority group in Kachin State. Myanmar's pro-democracy government in exile, the National Unity Government, condemned the attack, calling it yet another example of the military's indiscriminate use of extreme force against civilians. Last month, at least 8 civilians, including children, were killed in an airstrike on a village in northwest Myanmar, according to a human rights group, Ethnic Minority Rebels. The military has denied, however, international allegations it has committed atrocities against civilians and says it is fighting terrorists determined to destabilize the country. Western countries have imposed sanctions on the junta and its vast business network to try to choke off its revenue and access to arms from key suppliers like Russia. Meanwhile, the United States and the Philippines have launched the largest combat exercises in decades, which will involve live-fire drills, including a boat-sinking rocket assault in waters across the South China Sea and the Taiwan Strait that will likely inflame China. The annual drills will involve about 12,200 US, 5,400 Filipino, and 111 Australian personnel. America's warships and fighter jets, as well as its Patriot missiles, HMARS rocket launchers, and anti-tank javelins are being showcased. This year's exercise is opening in the Philippines a day after China concluded 3 days of its combat drills that simulated sailing off Taiwan. The annual drills by the long-time treaty allies called Balikatan, Tagalog meaning shoulder to shoulder, began on Tuesday and will run up to April 28. It involves more than 17,600 military personnel. It will be the latest display of American firepower in Asia, where Washington has repeatedly warned China over its increasingly aggressive actions in the disputed Sea Channel against Taiwan. The Biden administration has been strengthening an arc of alliances in the Indo-Pacific to better counter China, including in a possible confrontation over Taiwan. That dovetails with efforts by the Philippines under President Ferdinand Marcos Jr. to defend its territorial interests in the South China Sea by boosting joint military exercises with the U.S. and allowing rotating batches of American forces to stay in more Philippine military camps under a 2014 defense pact. About 12,200 US, 5,400 Filipino, and 11,111 Australian personnel are taking part in the exercises, the largest in Balikatan's 3-decade history. Washington and Beijing had been on a collision course over the long-seething territorial disputes involving China, the Philippines, and 4 other governments, including Beijing's goal of annexing Taiwan by force if necessary. Now, Pakistan-administered Kashmir's Prime Minister Sardar Tanveer Ilyas was sacked from his office by a court on Tuesday in a contempt case. The court order disclosed recently. Ilyas comes from the Pakistan Tehreek-e-Insaf party of former Prime Minister Imran Khan, who has been locked in a political wrangling with the government that succeeded him in Islamabad. The Kashmir leader was tried over a speech he made last week, criticizing the courts for what he said was interference in his government's affairs. Chief Justice of the Muzaffarabad High Court, Sadakat Hussain Raja, who headed a panel of 4 judges that convinced Ilyas, told a packed courtroom that he stands disqualified from being the member of the Legislative Assembly and ceases to hold any public office. A convicted leader under Pakistani law would be disqualified from contesting any elections for 5 years. He has the right to appeal to the Supreme Court against the sentence. The court showed a video of Ilyas' speech and asked him to verify whether it was him speaking and whether he wanted to contest the content of the speech. Ilyas did not contest and instead tendered an apology, which the court rejected. The disputed Himalaya region of Kashmir is divided between India and Pakistan. Pakistani-administered Kashmir is a semi-autonomous region with its own regional government. Moving on, visiting United Secretary General Antonio Guterres appealed on Tuesday for massive international support for Somalia as it battles a devastating drought and a grinding Islamist insurgency. Guterres, who arrived in Somalia's capital Mogadishu earlier in today, described his trip as a visit of solidarity. He had gone to ring the alarm on the need of massive international support, pointing to the difficulties faced by the country as it grapples with climate disaster and militancy. Although Somalia makes no contribution to climate change, the Somalis are among its greatest victims, with nearly 5 million people experiencing high levels of acute food insecurity. Already, Somalia is in the grip of a calamitous drought that has given many to the brink of famine, while the government is also engaged in a major offensive against the Al-Qaeda-linked Al-Shabaab Islamist militant group. The United Nations has launched a $2.6 billion appeal for humanitarian aid for the troubled Horn of Africa nation, but Guterres said it is currently only 15% funded. 5 straight failed rainy seasons in parts of Somalia, as well as Kenya and Ethiopia, have led to the worst drought in 4 decades, wiping out livestock and crops and forcing at least 1.7 million people from their homes in search of food and water. While famine thresholds have not been reached in Somalia, the UN says about half its population will need humanitarian assistance this year, with 8.3 million affected by the drought. Somalia was hit by a famine in 2011, which killed 260,000 people, more than half of them children under 6, partly because the international community did not act fast enough. President Hassan Sheikh Mohamud last year declared all-out war against Al-Shabaab, which has been fighting the fragile central government for more than 15 years. Now, the United Nations is being forced to make an appalling choice over whether to continue operations in Afghanistan while the Taliban government bans women from working for the organization, the world body disclosed recently. Under their austere interpretation of Islam, Taliban authorities have imposed a slew of restrictions on Afghan women since seizing power in 2021, including banning them from higher education and many government jobs. In December, they banned Afghan women from working for domestic and foreign non-governmental organizations, and on April 4, extended that to UN offices across the country. In a statement on Tuesday, the UN mission in Afghanistan said the ban was unlawful under international law, including the UN Charter, and for that reason, the United Nations cannot comply. The UN also said through the ban, the Taliban de facto authorities seek to force the United Nations into having to make an appalling choice between staying and delivering in support of the Afghan people and standing by the norms and principles which are duty-bound for them to uphold. The increasing curbs are reminiscent of the Taliban's first government between 1996 and 2001, when the United Nations said they were responsible for repeated human rights violations, particularly against girls and women. UN mission head Rosa Otunbayeva has initiated an operational review to decide next steps. In her words, and I quote, "It should be clear that any negative consequences of these crises for the Afghan people will be the responsibility of the de facto authorities," end quote. The world body employs around 400 Afghan women in the country. UN Humanitarian Coordinator in Afghanistan, Ramiz Alakbarov, told AFP soon after the ban that the decree violated the world body's charter. Since the ban was announced, the UN has ordered all its Afghan staff, men and women, not to report to the offices until further notice. The ban triggered international outrage, with the Taliban authorities coming under severe criticism. They have so far not issued any clarification or reason for the UN ban. Local employees make up the bulk of the 600 women working for the United Nations in the country. In total, there are about 3,300 Afghans in the country's 3,900-strong UN workforce. A number of Israeli ministers and lawmakers joined a rally on Monday in support of settlement building in the occupied West Bank. Far-right National Security Minister Itamar Ben-Gvir, Finance Minister Bezalel Smotrich, and the head of the Shomron Regional Council, a body responsible for a block of settlements in the West Bank, Yossi Dagan, took part in the rally, along with 20 lawmakers of the 120-seat Knesset. Participants marched towards Mount Sheba, near Beta town, south of Nablus, where the illegal Aviata outpost is established. "We are," according to the quote, "in order to say the Jewish people are strong," Ben-Gvir said during the rally. Last month, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu postponed a decision on the fate of the outpost until after the fasting month of Ramadan, which will end later this month. The outpost was built by Israeli settlers in May 2021 near Nablus. Monday's rally was staged amid rising tension across the Palestinian territories after Israeli police last week forcibly removed worshippers from inside the Al-Aqsa Mosque complex in occupied East Jerusalem. Israeli and Palestinian estimates indicate that about 650,000 settlers are living in 164 settlements and 116 outposts in the West Bank, including in occupied East Jerusalem. Under international law, all Jewish settlements in occupied territories are considered illegal. A French prosecutor says investigators are treating the death of at least 6 people who were killed when a building collapsed in the city of Marseille as a possible involuntary homicide case. Prosecutor Dominique Laurent said an investigation was opened on that basis after the first body was found in the building, which collapsed in a fiery explosion early on Sunday. Meanwhile, New Zealand's cabinet has achieved gender equality for the first time in the country's history, less than a week after a third female leader, Jacinda Ardern, made an emotional farewell to politics. Parity was achieved on Tuesday with 10 women and 10 male members in cabinet after Prime Minister Chris Hopkins announced a reshuffle promoting MP Willoughby Prime as Conservation Minister. For the first time in New Zealand's history, half of the people sitting around the cabinet table will be women, the Prime Minister said. The MP for Northland, Ms. Prime, will also hold the portfolios of Ministers of Youth and Associate Minister for Health and for Arts and Culture. Mr. Hipkins said although he was pleased to have achieved gender parity, it wasn't a decisive factor in the reshuffle. He said Ms. Prime was chosen because of her skills as a person and the portfolio she currently holds. The Pacific nation elected its most diverse and inclusive parliament ever under Ms. Ardern, who resigned as Prime Minister in January after more than 5 years in office, saying she no longer felt she had enough in the tank to lead. Her and Mr. Hipkins' Labour Party won the last election by a landslide in 2020, with 58 women across all parties in the 120-member parliament. A number of resignations later boosted that total to 61 when the country made history with female MPs outnumbering their male counterparts for the first time. Soraya Peke Mason tipped women into the majority in October last year when she was sworn into parliament. Mr. Hipkins, who entered office in January, has promoted 3 women to his cabinet, with Wellington-based MPs Jenny Anderson and Barbara Edmonds added as part of the Prime Minister's first reshuffle. And that is a wrap on the news across the globe. My name is Esther Mwachuku. Do subscribe to our YouTube channel at Voice of the People Television, including all of the social media handles at VOP Television. Good afternoon, and do stay tuned for more interesting programs.